Hey crew, it's Pitt, and we're back with another Bible study. And this one is going to be a heavy one, so if you are unfamiliar with what we are doing here in Exodus, you should start at the top. I hold some rather unconventional beliefs. My beliefs are coming from reading this book, word for word, line by line, and there's a lot that I cannot get on board with. And so you really should watch it from the top to understand where I'm at before you get into this part, because this part today is for sure going to step on some toes. We just got done yesterday, or in the last one, with the Ten Commandments, and now we're going to start getting into the statutes. And these next three chapters, which we're going to try to get through today, Exodus 21, 22, and 23, are skipped an awful lot. You have probably never read them. You have almost certainly never heard them read aloud in church. And so, what we're going to do, let me see if I can get this to quit doing that craziness. And so what we're going to do is this. We're going to read it. We're going to start in 21 because we just finished up in 20. And at the end of 20, I want to bring attention to this because we did not spend quite enough time on it. The fact that the altar and all of the things that are associated with the worship of God should be not cut, shaped, or formed by human hands. That is very important because we will be getting into temple things here very shortly where everything has to be cut, shaped, and formed by human hands. And it is a direct contradiction to this. So I want to make sure that it is popped out that this is the idolatry forbidden, and it says, do not build it with stones shaped by tools. If you use a chisel on it, you will defile it. Keep that in mind when we get into the other parts later. We will revisit that, but I think somewheres in these three chapters that's going to pop up, so I wanted to drop the background in right now. And now we're going to jump into Exodus 21. All right, so before we really dive into this, let's talk about discernment. The spirit of discernment that I have been given is based upon this. God is love and truth. God is faithful, and God is the one who rewards the faithful, those who keep his statutes and those who practice the law that he has set upon in their hearts, both through their actions and their thoughts. Now, that would require absolute perfection, and nobody ever attains that. But that is who God is. And there is a separate entity that fell who has attributes of the other side of that, who is deceitful, who is malicious and vile and separationalist. And so with that spirit of discernment that God is true and the enemy is not, we were going to dig into these statutes. I know that a lot of people will take offense to the fact that I went and I state that at Abraham everything went wrong. At the beginning of the required blood sacrifice, especially the one involving humans, everything went wrong. We were given very clear commandments, and that those commandments are repeated throughout the book, and that is to love the Lord thy God with all of thy heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. That is summed up, is the Ten Commandments. That is summed up the entirety of the Bible, except for all the details in the middle that really just keep us divided and keep us confused. And Exodus 21 starts off with a very good example of that there. It is important to remember, historically speaking, that slavery is. The fact that we exist now in a relatively slave-free society is an anomaly in history completely. The freedom of man did not really exist prior to 1776. Now, you can make an argument way back before cities that there was it then too, and I will not argue against that, but I'm talking about in like the last 40,000 years, slavery is. Stronger people will go and take over other people. People who are prosperous have people that come to them and say, hey, I will work for you for food and shelter. And that is what this is mainly dealing with in the beginning, but it gets into the other part as well. And so, with that context in mind, let's talk about this. These are the ordinances that you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free without paying anything. If he arrived alone, he is to leave alone, and if he arrived with a wife, she is to leave with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. Okay, big unpack time. I can pretty much guarantee you that you have never heard that verse read aloud in a church. And that is because it is saying that slavery is the norm. Now, this was more of an indentured servitude type of thing. And the 6 years really gets broken down because it's taken to mean on the Sabbath year, which is a thing and is a wonderful thing. We're going to get into that very shortly as well. But it's taken to mean that if you go into servitude on the 6th year, you are relieved of it on the 7th year. And that is just subverting the meaning of this, even the most well-intentioned meaning of this. It's important to bear in mind that at this point in time, women especially were property. I do not agree with that, but that is what history says. That is the culture then. And so women belonged to somebody, no matter who they were. They either belonged to their father or they were sold to belong to their husband. That is the basis of all of these cultures in the area. None of them, as far as I know, held any differing belief. And so these sets of laws were put out for the most effective humane treatment available. It's one of those levels of responsibility, right? This is a level of being responsible to your slaves that previously had not existed, and therefore it is a good thing. But for a very long time afterwards, it has been used vainly in God's name to justify man owning another man. That is never justified. Or man owning a woman. That is never justified. Now, your children are yours on loan from God, but they belong to you until they are given back to his care. And so that is a whole separate issue. But no man or woman should ever own a man or woman. Period. The end. And that continues today. There are people being sold in the open air markets today. Okay, now, as far as the 7, I hold that the world in general and the universe in particular operates on an octave system. And so there are 7 levels and then the beginning of the next octave. And that the 7 and then the beginning is represented here in one of its forms. The 7th year, the year of rest, before the beginning of the new octave and the ending of the old octave, which is the 8th. So that is confirmation for me for some of my other beliefs that I have talked about in other parts of these videos. And we will see that 7 repeated way many times, and it is a significant thing because it is a completion number. 7 is the number of completion. I don't care what numerology says. I don't care what gematria says. I don't care what any of them say. 7 is the number of completion, and 1 and 8 are the numbers of beginning and end as alpha omegas. So completion and beginning and end is not the same. And then we're not going to get into that. Okay. Now, let's continue into the verses. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, and I do not want to go free, then his master is to bring him before the judges, and he shall take him to the door or doorpost, and pierce his ear with an awl, and then he shall serve his master for life. And so, you could, by blood sacrifice, commit your life to another in the witness of others. Sit on that for a second. just for a second. You could, through the sacrifice of your blood, commit your life to the service of another. And not only your life, but your generation's life. That is important to remember as we go through the rest of the study as well. And if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as the men servants do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who has designated her for herself, he must allow her to be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners, since he has broken faith with her. And if he chooses her for his son, he must deal with her as a daughter. If he takes another wife, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights of his first wife. If, however, he does not provide her with these three things, she is free to go without a monetary payment. And so we have divorce. Again, this is in the best possible light, trying to put the most humane spin on life possible, because at this point in time, things were bad. And so this was setting things just a step above. That does not mean going forward that it is a good thing. I also believe that there was a spirit of discontent that guided these things, and that blood sacrifice is one of those that entity's things, and keeping division going is another one of this entity's things, and separation by gender in very specific ways to cause the most animosity possible is definitely in line with the other entity. I don't like putting a name on it because I don't know what the right name is. Like, some people call it one name, and that could be one thing, but I don't know that, right? That could be a misinterpretation from something else. And so I don't really like putting a name on either one of those entities, right? There is a good entity that is considered to be God and the Creator, and that is whom I serve. And then there's another entity who is division and hate, and that is not who I serve. All right. But if he does not, okay, he must not reduce the food, clothing, or marital rights. So he has to feed her, give her clothes, and have sex with her. And if he does not provide her with these three things, she can go free. Okay, right? That's just whatever. Like, I can't even with that. Like, if he takes another wife, that's cool. He just can't stop doing these things for the one he's got. Like, she doesn't even get a say in these things, right? Like, he just says, hey, you're kind of cute. Here's 30 shekels. You're coming home with me. And this other woman whom he has bought to marry just has to deal with it. We do not live in the same times. All right, so personal injury laws. Whoever strikes and kills a man must surely be put to death. If, however, he did not lie in wait, but God allowed it to happen, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. But if a man schemes and acts willfully against a neighbor to kill him, you must take him away from my altar to be put to death. Whoever strikes his mother or father must surely be put to death. Whoever kidnaps another man must be put to death, whether he sells him or the man is found in his possession. And anyone who curses his father or mother must surely be put to death. If men are quarreling and one strikes the other with a stone and a fist, and he does not die but is confined to bed, then the one who struck him shall go unpunished, as long as the other can get up and walk around outside with his staff. Nevertheless, he must compensate the man for his lost work and see that he is completely healed. All right, we're going to stop here. We're going to unpack this. The natural course of human beings is mean. It really, really is. The only thing that keeps us slightly civil these days is the threat of authority. And as much as you may not like to hear that, libertarians, it is true. If we got rid of government, we would have despots within a day. It really would happen. If the government just disbanded and all of the sheriffs and police departments and everything just faded into the disappearing and they're gone. And everybody is free to do exactly what they want to do. Somebody is killing a lot of people. It's happening. They are taking control of a significant portion of time and grabbing or a significant portion of real estate, and they are grabbing as many weapons and people who will be loyal as they possibly can, and they are fixing to rain terror upon their neighbors. That is the reality of anarchy. That is the reality of life. That is the history of mankind all the way back to Cain and Abel. And so, what we have here is basically saying it's okay to defend yourself, and in certain instances, if you're just mad and you hit each other and you get knocked out, but there's no permanent damage, it's all right. If you give permanent damage, then you're responsible for compensating that because you did that. This is setting up consequences for actions. Most of them are going to be perfectly justified because that is the way that you sneak in the sneaky shit, right? You don't come out and start with your tyrannical parts. You come out with the logical stuff first, and you're like, well, yeah, this are obviously true. I don't really know about this one, but I'm going to take it for granted because this authoritative source is telling me it's okay. And so they'll slip in things in the middle of these laws that are like, wait, what? And then you have problems. This is interesting because cursing is a very specific thing. It is a speaking of destruction into life, right? And that is a very real thing. People these days do not take it to be that, and they think that cursing means saying a word. It is not. It is invoking something, and so this does kind of make sense. The kidnapping another man absolutely makes sense. Striking your mother and father absolutely making sense. And their age of majority was 13. So anyone over the age of 13 who struck his father or mother must surely be put to death. What would happen in our society today if we enforced that simple law? We'd have a whole lot less kids. As rough as that is to say, it is true. If you scheme and act willfully, you shall take him away from the altar. Do not let him be part of the congregation anymore and put him to death. If he is a planned murderer, if he murders in cold blood and formulates a plan to kill someone, these are all great. If a man strikes his manservant or maidservant with a rod and the servant dies by his hand, he will be punished. However, if the servant gets up after a day or two, the owner shall not be punished, since the servant is his property. See, we're not talking about slipping in this heinous. And here's the main problem with, I can take this as a general overview of stepping up the level of responsibility and be okay with most of these laws being written the way they are. What I don't have, I cannot reconcile is this. This is the law written down by God himself. This is what is given to Moses to give to the people to live their lives by. And instead of him saying, there shall be no slavery, we get this. If you beat your servant and he's in the bed for 2 days and then he gets up, that's all right. He belongs to you. That's what God says. That's God's word. That is his decision on how earth should be. That is faithful. That is true. That is God himself saying that. Or it's not. Or these laws, while mostly well-intentioned and true, are shaped by somebody else. Or it's completely independent of any divine input whatsoever, and it is merely men writing laws. That is a third option. I think it's the second option. I think it's the other entity, because some of these are beyond men to just be able to reason with the technology that we assume now. There are definitely laws coming that tell us about things that, at the assumption of knowledge that they had, they could not have known about without outside sources. That is why I lean towards entities. That's why I lean towards it is the wrong entity slipping in just little things to keep things divided and keep things on the wrong track. Because if it is God himself and he is sending his divine representative of goodness, he's going to stop slavery right there. He's going to be like, slavery shall be illegal for my people altogether. You shall not own a slave. You have just been freed from slavery. But instead, we also did not hit this. But instead also, if you buy a Hebrew servant, not an Israelite, this is the Israelites. If we are dealing with God, he is addressing them as Israelites. Why does it keep going back to Hebrew? All right. If men who are fighting strike a pregnant woman and her child is born prematurely, but there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband demands, and as the court allows. But if serious injury results, then you must require a life for a life. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot. Burn for a burn, wound for a wound, and stripe for stripe. This actually gets read out a lot, right? Y'all have heard this one before. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Especially if you're in the more Pentecostal edges of the church. This is again laying out a very clear principle of life, right? Obviously, if it has to be designated that a pregnant woman is different from a woman, and a pregnant woman has a child, that does not mean you can kill it, right? And if you accidentally are in a fight, right, and you accidentally strike a woman, and her child is born prematurely, and there is no further injury, so everything happens, she has the baby's fine, she's fine, there's no injuries, you still get fined for injuring the woman. Now, you can get into property rights, we just did that, but this is a good one, right? This is very, very set on what is considered a life. But if a serious injury results from an accidental striking of a woman, then you must require a life for a life. And there are 2 lives that she is holding. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So equality. If he cripples her, then cut off his leg. Now, I don't agree with that, but that is what the requirement is. If a man strikes and blinds the eye of his manservant or maidservant, he must let the servant go free as compensation for the eye. And if he knocks out the tooth, he must let him go free as a compensation for the tooth. So make sure you don't, it's okay if you beat them enough they can't get out of bed for 2 days. That is perfectly fine. Where we have a problem is if you start knocking things out. Okay. What happens if you cut off an ear? I'm assuming that counts too, right? If an ox gores a man or woman to death, the ox must surely be stoned, and its meat must not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be held responsible. But if the ox has a habit of goring, and his owner has been warned, yet does not restrain it, and it kills a man or a woman, then the ox must be stoned, and the owner must be put to death. If payment is demanded of him instead, he may redeem his life by paying the full amount demanded of him. If a ox gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done according to the same rule. And if the ox gores a manservant or maidservant, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver. And the ox must be stoned. Oh. All right, we're going to get to that part next. So, this is specifying an ox, but it is not specific to an ox. This is a generalized principle of life. You're responsible for the livestock that you own, be that a dog, a cat, an ox, or whatever. If your livestock is acting out of character, which is what is happening with an ox that gores, an ox does not naturally get that aggressive. They are naturally somewhat docile, and they like their service to a great degree. It gives them something to do. They actually do like it. It's like a donkey. A donkey likes to pull a plow. They may not act like it, but they do. Horses like to be ridden and to go. Dogs like to go hunting with you. These are like the natural tendencies of animals. But if they go against that natural tendency, you're responsible for it. And furthermore, it tells you not to eat it for a reason, because if it's acting out of character, there is a good probability that there is something wrong. And if it is viral, you can get it. If it is bacterial, you can get it. If you do not prepare meat correctly, you can get it. And so most of the dietary restrictions and laws have to deal with things that can kill you. We will go through them in detail as we go through them in detail. But this is a general life principle being handed down right here. This is saying that you are responsible for the animals in your care. Where have we heard that before back in Genesis? You're responsible for the animals in your care. And so if your animal is acting out of the box, it is your responsibility to take care of that. And if you don't, and if it has a habit, and you do not do what you need to do, the ox must be stoned, and so must you. That is the required payment, right? If payment is required instead, he may redeem it by giving the full amount. So they can put a price on your life, and you can redeem that. We're not going to get into the validity of that, right? If a man opens or digs a pit and fails to cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall pay the owner, and the dead animal will be his. If a man injures his neighbor's ox and it dies, then he must sell the live one and divide the proceeds. They must also divide the dead animal. But if it was known that the ox had a habit of goring it, its owner failed to restrain it, he shall pay full compensation, ox for ox, and the dead animal will be his. And so we have contradictions of terms here that need to be addressed. Now, this is a continuation at 33. This is a continuation of you are responsible. If you dig a pit, you are responsible for what falls into the pit. That is, again, an assignment of personal responsibility. But this getting into dividing the animal and who gets to eat it if it's goring people goes against the previous law. And so that is a contradiction within the same chapter. I know it's not that significant. I know most people don't care. I know most people overlook it. But if this is the infallible divine word of God, then this is the infallible divine word of God, and there can be no contradictions. Exodus 22. I'm going to try to get through this part fairly quickly because it's basically just a whole bunch of laws. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters or sells it, he must repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If a thief is caught breaking in and is beaten to death, no one shall be guilty of bloodshed. Let's read that again. If a thief is caught breaking in and is beaten to death, no one shall be guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens after sunrise, there is guilt for his bloodshed. So, if you catch him at night, kill him. Because, that entity at night likes that shit. But if it happens during the daytime, if you catch him in your house in day, then there's guilt if you shed his blood. That don't make no damn sense. It don't make no sense. If a thief is a thief, is a thief is a thief. And so if they're stealing, they should pay, right? It's okay if you kill him at night, but it's not okay if you kill him in the daytime. A thief must make full restitution, and if he has nothing, he shall be sold for his theft. If what was stolen is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox, a donkey, or a sheep, he must pay back double. If a man grazes his livestock in a field or a vineyard and allows them to stray so that they graze in someone else's field, he must make restitution from the best of his own field or vineyard. If a fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes so that it consumes stacked or standing grain, or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make restitution. If a man gives his neighbor money or goods for safekeeping, and they are stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if caught, must pay back double. If the thief is not found, the owner of the house must appear before the judges to determine whether he has taken his neighbor's property. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, a donkey, a sheep, a garment, or any lost item that someone claims, "This is mine," both parties shall bring their cases before the judges. The one whom the judges find guilty must pay back double to his neighbor. If a man gives a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to be cared for by his neighbor, but it dies, or is injured, or stolen while no one is watching, an oath before the Lord shall be made between the parties to determine whether or not a man has taken his neighbor's property. The owner must accept the oath and require no restitution. Okay, so what we're seeing is a repeated pattern of if you are responsible, you are responsible. And the judge's job is to determine who is the responsible party so that restitution can be made. This is being repeated over and over and over. It's being broken down into specific cases. The reason it is being done that way is because people are dumb. Like, a person can be smart, but people are dumb. And in general, most people don't care about the minutia of law. That's perfectly fine. That is perfectly normal. That's why we have judges, so that people can bring them all of these dumb things. And it needs to be clearly defined because people need laws. Now, all of this can be summed up in the one. Love the Lord thy God with all of thy heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you do that and you realize that all of these things are part of God and they are all divided by God as He has divided them, then I'm going to do my best to make sure that nobody else's stuff gets messed up too. That's just how it works. And so this is a whole lot of specificity because people need things to be specific, not because God needed to make them specific. All right. The owner must accept the oath and require no restitution if it was stolen. But if the animal was actually stolen from the neighbor, he must make restitution to the owner. If the animal was torn to pieces, he shall bring it as evidence and need not make restitution for the torn carcass. If a man borrows an animal from his neighbor and it is injured or died while his owner is not present, he must make full restitution. If the owner was present, no restitution is required. If the animal was rented, the fee covers the loss. Being specific. Laws of social responsibility. Here again is where it gets deep and dirty. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged in marriage and sleeps with her, he must pay the full dowry for her to be his wife. And if her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, the man must still pay an amount comparable to the bridal price of a virgin. You must not allow a sorceress to live. These are getting very, very specific. And so we're going to pop this one out right here, this 18, because this is not pharmakia. This is not even in the spirit of pharmakia. We're also going to talk about this one real quick. If a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged in marriage and sleeps with her, he must pay for her. This one turned my wife off of God for a while. I can tell you that. It's because it's dumb. Like, I understand the culture of the time, but if this is God setting down the law, should be a no-brainer, right? You don't get to buy people. Again, every time that shows up, it's not God, because God is about freedom and truth, and God is about you being free and true. Like, we give God credit for getting the Israelites out of Egypt, freeing them from slavery, despite the fact that they were not in any way following the laws of their fathers. And so, you must not allow sorcerers to live. This is important. Okay, so this is literally talking about witchcraft. This is talking about those who meddle in the dark arts. And it's specifically the dark arts, because we have seen a sorceress who not only lived, but was vital to the survival of the Israelites. Miriam was a sorceress, a prophetess. Okay, same thing. The only difference between a sorceress and a prophetess, between a sorcerer and a prophet, between the wise men and the magi and all the rest of them, is the intentions and the guidance of God Himself. If you are separating God from the process, and your intentions are not for the betterment of all, then you are practicing sorcery. I don't care if you call it Wicca and it's nature worship. If you are separating God and your intention is anything but the best for all, you are practicing sorcery. If you are calling into your life through the use of names, sigils, or herbs, anything that is not of the plan and directly given by God, you are practicing sorcery. And that is who this is referring to. This is referring specifically to those who call down curses upon people and who speak destruction into life. We're not going to get into the full word study behind this, but there is a deep word study behind this sorceress, and it is basically, you must not turn to mediums or spiritists. Do not seek the dead. Do not seek to speak to anyone who is not alive. It is possible the energy that is you existed before it was you, and it will exist after it is you, and it is simultaneously in you and everywhere at the same time. And so are the others. But where they are and what they are doing and who they are is not always clearly defined to us, and there are spirits out there who will take advantage of any access that you allow them into your life. And so, if you, with the best of intentions, go to seek out speaking to your mother, you might get to speak to her. But you might get to speak to a deceiver who knows how to deceive you into believing that is her. And through such, you open a gateway into your soul. Do not seek the dead. Whenever you seek a vision or anything else, it should be through God Himself, prayer and meditation and fasting in accordance with His will. This is so very important, and it is hidden down here, and it is overshadowed by the pharmakia argument later in the book. There is a difference between someone who works the same energies for each entity. Okay. Whoever lies with an animal must surely be put to death. Okay, I'm down with that. Let's talk about riding goats. If anyone sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone, he must be set apart for destruction. This is again very specifically talking about the God of creation who is beyond all names. You must not exploit or oppress a foreign resident, for you yourselves were foreigners in the land of Egypt. Okay, hold that one in mind. You must not mistreat any widow or orphan, and if you do mistreat them, and they cry out to me in distress, I will surely hear their cry. My anger will be kindled, and I will kill you with a sword. Then your wives will become widows, and your children will be fatherless. Well, that's better. That's a tough one, because I do not condone domestic violence in any shape or fashion. Discipline of children should never extend into anger, although it can be physical. But you should never have an issue of domestic abuse. The rules of thumb and shit like that is just dumb. There's no reason to raise your hand to your wife if you are an intelligent man and she is an intelligent woman. You should be able to come to a conclusion without violence. And I do believe that absolutely in every case. And so, what I don't agree with in this particular part is the fact that there's no room for correction here. Right? It says, yeah, don't mistreat them, but if I hear that you are, I'm going to kill you. There's no room for some correction. And sometimes correction can work, sometimes it won't. Well, most times even it won't. But sometimes it can, and there should be that option first. That's all I'm saying. If this is God who's just telling us this is the way that you should live your life, then I think maybe there should be some room for correction. If you lend money to one of my people among you who is poor, he must not act as a creditor to him. You are not to charge him interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as collateral, return it to him by sunset, because his cloak is the only covering he has for his body, and where else will he sleep in? And if he cries out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. All right, before we get too far. This is also showing at a very early age, right? This is very early in history when we're leaving Egypt, compound interest. And the fact that the monetary concepts of compound interest are displayed as a fundamental thing here. Compound interest is a powerful tool that if you're unaware of that, you should definitely make yourself aware of that. But it is also the root of the love of money. Greed lives a lot in compound interest. And so this is him telling them to not be greedy to each other. It's okay for the foreigners. You gouge the shit out of them, because, don't exploit or oppress them. But it's okay if you charge them interest. Like, it's only among my people that you're not to charge interest. The rest of them, it's fine. Don't oppress them or exploit them, but exploit the money out of them. And taking the neighbor's cloak as collateral, that's a whole cultural thing where people would work for other people or borrow things and they would give things as collateral. And it's a whole cultural thing that we're not even really going to dive into. It's not that important. You must not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. Well, a whole lot of Christians would get their feet stepped on right now today if they read this one out loud in church. I'm just saying, because they'll dig you with that don't blaspheme God. Well, we would never say them words. But ask them about Job and see what they're going to say about it. Now, I'm not going to agree or disagree. I have made my beliefs quite well known, and we don't need to get into that one today. But what would you think would happen? Like, what do you think is happening? Like, one of the most vitriolic responses I ever got was when I asked people to pray for someone else. Right? I had somebody literally say that they would rather go to hell than to pray for the soul of another man. I had somebody put that in my comments. Or curse the ruler of your people. You should pray for your rulers even if you do not agree with them, even if you did not vote for them, even if you do not like what they are doing. You should pray for them to be enlightened, for God to take control of their life, for Him to change things around. I'm not telling you to pray for their success in their agenda. I'm asking you to pray for their souls. You must not hold back offerings from your granaries or vats. You are to give me the firstborn of your sons. You shall do likewise with your cattle and your sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days, but on the 8th day you're to give them to me. You are to be my holy people. You must not eat the meat of a mauled animal found in the field. You are to throw it to the dogs. All right, so once again, we are getting into child sacrifice. Take it how you want. You can redeem them, but you got to sacrifice your firstborn child to this God. That is what the circumcision is about. That is what the Passover is about. That is what the feasts are about. It is about redeeming your firstborn child every year when you should be killing them for your God. That is what this is about. You are to be my holy people. You must not eat the meat of a mauled animal. That's going to set you apart. Small inconsistencies. All right, we're going to try to get to 23 because it is rather short, and this is the end of this real section. So, justice and mercy. Right? Maybe we'll find God here, right? You shall not spread a false report. Do not join the wicked by being a malicious witness. Do not tell false witnesses on your neighbors. Do not lie on your neighbors, even if you don't like them. You should not follow the crowd in wrongdoing. When you testify in a lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd. and do not show favoritism to a poor man and his lawsuit. Keep a blind eye on justice. Be justice. If you encounter your enemy's stray ox or donkey, you must return it to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you fallen under its load, do not leave it there. You must help him with it. That is what I was talking about with the prayer. Even if it's not physically seeing someone struggling, even if you disagree vehemently with their entire lifestyle, you should be trying to help them get God to lessen the load. You shall not deny justice to the poor in their lawsuits. Stay far away from false accusation. Do not kill the innocent or the just, for I will not acquit the guilty. Do not accept a bribe, for the bribe blinds those who see and twists the words of the righteous. Do not oppress a foreign resident, since you yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. This section right here is pretty daggone good. Be truth, be justice. Do not allow yourself in personal responsibility to be a part of the wrong side of things. Be diligent in discovering which side of things is the correct one. I'm not here to try to tell you which side to be on. You already know. You already know, even if you talk yourself into fighting for the other side. You know where you should be. It's not up to me to tell you. This oppressing a foreign resident we'll get back into at a later date. I don't think we get back into it now, but we've already seen it's okay to exploit them. The Sabbath laws. For 6 years you are to sow your land and gather its produce, but in the 7th year you must rest, let it rest, and lie fallow, so that the poor among your people may eat from the field, and wild animals may consume what they leave. Do the same with your vineyard and olive grove. For 6 days you are to do your work, but on the 7th day you must cease, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and the son of your maidservant may be refreshed, as well as the foreign resident. Pay close attention to everything I have said to you. You must not invoke the names of other gods. They must not be heard on your lips. This gets difficult for me because I invoke Baal all the time when I'm telling you about this. That does not mean that I am trying to worship God, that entity, or anything of that nature. You watch. Do not give your attention any more than you absolutely have to. The Sabbath. The Sabbath is an important thing. We touched on that back in the Ten Commandments, and here we're going to touch on it a little bit more because it is, again, a life concept. In addition to the week, you have Sabbath years. Every 7th year, there is a greater cycle of 70 years. There is greater cycles than that of 7,000 years. There is the beginning and ending of the octave repeated throughout history, and it is evident throughout history. If you follow this, and for 6 years, you collect an extra piece and store it for the 7th year, then your land really does do better. It really does. If you let it rest and rejuvenate, you can farm it productively for 6 years. And then if you let it lie fallow for the 7th year, when you go back into the 8th year, or the 1st year of the new cycle, it really does better. That can be broken into bigger and smaller cycles, repeated in a multitude of things in your life. That comes with, if you're writing a book and you can follow that cycle up and down, and you can get where you need to be in an effective manner. If you're doing whatever, if you can break it into 7 cycles, it will help you to flow. It will. The Sabbath is important, though. The rest period is important as well. It is important to observe God. It is important to observe the rest that God has given us. Here we get into one of my problems, and that is the sacrifices. We've talked before, and we will talk again about the blood sacrifices that are required and that these feasts commemorate. And that is a problem for me. The Passover That's a problem. That blood sacrifice that is required there, the amount of death that is wrapped up in that whole series of events that goes to an entity, and then the waters part in front of the mountain of Baal, that's a big problem for me. And the commemoration is also a problem for me. It may not be for you, so you may be perfectly fine with this. It is also a time marker. Now, you don't have to observe the times and the feasts in order to observe the time markers that they represent. And the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the spring markers for planting, and the Feast of Harvest is the fall markers for pulling. And so the Feast of Ingathering is the end of years. And so this is a observation of seasonal activities. It is laid out due to the lunar calendar later on. I don't think they were going to get quite into that yet. I think that's either on Leviticus or Deuteronomy, and we will be reading it. But 3 times a year you are to celebrate a feast to me. You are to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread as I commanded you. At the appointed time in the month of Abib, you are to eat unleavened bread for 7 days, because that was the month you came out of Egypt. No one may appear before me empty-handed. So make sure you bring your sacrifice and don't bring any leaven. I think that this particular entity had a problem with yeast. I think that might be an issue for this entity. You are also to keep the Feast of the Harvest with the first fruits of the produce from what you sow in the field, and keep the Feast of Ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather your produce from the field. 3 times a year all of your males are to appear before the Lord God. You must not offer the blood of my sacrifices with anything leavened, nor may the fat of my feast remain until morning. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God, and you must not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. All right, one second. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is the Passover. We have dealt extensively into that. The Feast of the Harvest, we will get into the feasts more when we get into the feast and they get outlined more. But here it is telling them to keep something that they don't even really have yet. Now, you can make the argument that there were these celebrations in Egypt, but if so, they were not Israeli, because they are not laid down yet. We don't have them yet. And again, we are getting into the sacrifice. And this is 3 times a year now. You are to sacrifice and don't offer the blood with anything leavened. I think that this particular entity has a problem with yeast and growth. You must not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. It was a cultural practice, in particular dealing with the worship of one of the local gods. Boiling the young goat in its mother's milk was part of that. And so this is specifically denying a worship practice of the other people. God's angel to lead. Behold, I am sending an angel before you to protect you along the way and bring you to the place I have prepared. Pay attention to him and listen to his voice. Do not defy him, for he will not forgive rebellion, since my name is in him. But if you will listen carefully to his voice and do everything I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and a foe to your foes. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, Jebusites, and I will annihilate them. You must not bow down to their gods or serve them or follow their practices. Instead, you are to demolish them and smash their sacred stones to pieces. So you shall serve the Lord your God, and he will bless your bread and water. And I will take away sickness from among you. No woman in your land will miscarry or be barren. I will fulfill the number of your days. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn and run. I will send the hornet before you to drive the Hivites and Canaanites and Hittites out of your way. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, otherwise the land would become desolate, and wild animals would multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out ahead of you, until you become fruitful, and possess the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the land of the Philistines, and from the deserts of the Euphrates, for I will deliver the inhabitants into your hand, and I will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them or with their gods. They must not remain in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. All right, unpacking. We can't do a full unpack because we don't have the rest of the story yet. But what is happening here? The promise of God Himself is that He is sending an angel to lead them into what we know as Israel, right? What we know will become the land of Israel. But at this moment, it belongs to several other peoples. There are very good arguments that can be made talking about the lineage and the results of those lineages and abnormal sizes, such as evidenced in Goliath. And that is the reason why these particular peoples are chosen for slaughter, down to everything they have touched. There is another argument that can definitely be made talking about genetic manipulation in the area and abominations of things that led to destruction once before, and the carrying on of those lineages here. We're going to get into that when we start invading the land of these peoples. And we will talk about their histories and what is speculated about them, because for the most part, it is speculation. The bow down not to their gods and do not follow them in their practices is a very big repeating thing that is never followed ever by Israel, ever. And yet there's still the bloodline. You shall serve your Lord your God, and He will bless your bread and water, and He will take away sickness from among you. Well, we definitely see that. We definitely see that in history, that this promise of God is fulfilled. Now, people will tell you that this is the promise of future Zion beyond, but this is dealing with here and now. This is His promise to Israel while in the wilderness in front of Sinai, before the 40-year sojourn. Right? They have just escaped. They have wandered for a few months, and now they are in front of the altar or the mountain of God, and the entity of God has spoken, and they have heard Him while Moses has interceded in between. The fear was too much for them, and a blood sacrifice has become required. A yearly observation of the redemption of your firstborn, instead of killing them and sacrificing them to this God, has become required. A physical cutting off of pieces and throwing that on the altar has become required. The requirements of this God are growing in blood and treasure daily. We will be getting into more of that as we get farther into Exodus and farther into the book. There will be no barren women in your land. Okay, we'll tell that to several. But what happens to these barren women? What happens to the women who are recorded in the Bible as being barren? Almost every time it is recorded is that they are visited by an entity and then they have a child mysteriously. That is something to bear in mind as we go forward, that the promise of the God that these people serve is that they will not be barren. They will not be sick, and they will not have to fight. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea. I will deliver the inhabitants into your hand, and you will drive them out before you. Right? But where's it at? I will send the hornet before you to drive them out of your way. I will make your enemies turn and run. I will send my terror ahead of you to throw confusion. He's telling them repeatedly that he is going to fight the fight. I will be an enemy. My angel will go before you and into the land, and I will annihilate them. He's not saying I will lead you into their annihilation here, which is what is implied later when they go and start annihilating things. What he is saying is, I will send this angel to protect you and bring you into the place. If you listen carefully, I will be an enemy to your enemies, and my angel will go before you and bring you into the land, and I will annihilate them. He is saying very plainly in a promise to Israel that they will be giving the land without a fight. Bear that in mind as we get into the next part. Not today. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a very complicated topic. I know that I hold some very, very unconventional beliefs and that it will set some people off. I don't apologize for doing that. I try to be as polite as I can about it. I cannot just let it ride any longer. God will not allow me to do that. And so I am here doing this. We are reading the Bible and just seeing what it says. If that upsets you, let me know down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. You're perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been pittstake. Peace.